Afghanistan for people who don't have a religion anymore. I did my research on the case of non-religious asylum seekers who arrived to the Netherlands, but I will focus in the presentation first on Afghanistan itself, and then the change to if you leave your country, what does that to your story? According to the Global Index, the people in Afghanistan would not acknowledge to be an atheist. And when reading that statement, it was, for me, quite obvious. But today I will look at what are the reasons why you cannot acknowledge in Afghanistan that you are a non-believer. In my research, these are two quotes from the Afghans that I interviewed. I was looking at opposites in this sense. I talked with them about their religion in Afghanistan itself and about the period that they were non-religious anymore. And the contradiction you see is that freedom is the big thing they gained. For them, freedom is really important. And what you saw is the period in Afghanistan was described with metaphors mainly, which showed that it's really hard to describe how it felt to be non-religious in Afghanistan. So they described it mainly as imprisonment, captivity, being locked in a room, as you can read, that they felt they had no freedom to be themselves. To start with, Afghanistan is known as Afghanistan by most of the people, but it's an Islamic republic, so it's inherent that it's religious from the start. So the state religion is the Islam, as many of you know, and that's in all the legislation in the country. It's inherent. The Islam is practiced by almost everyone in the country. You have different Islamic groups, but for this focus will be on the environment of the people that I researched is religious. There is no space for non-religion. One of the participants said, like, in my life it's everywhere. Like, the Islam decides when I go to bed, when I wake up, who I marry, where I marry. And that's the point in Afghanistan. On your identification it's marked what your religion is. It's family laws are Sharia law, it's all mixed. And the violations they face, there are many, but I focus on a few today. And it's mainly focused on the freedom of religion or to be non-religious, and the freedom of expression and the freedom of assembly. To start with, I wanted to first use one definition of apostasy because there are many different ones. For today I wanted to use persons who are considered to have abandoned or renounced the religious belief or principles of Islam. In the criminal code in Afghanistan there's no definition of apostasy, so it's hard to know before like who will be prosecuted, because in the criminal code it's not mentioned. If you look at the legal context, it's mainly focused on Islamic law, Sharia law, because there is mentioned the death penalty for non-believers and apostates. In this presentation I will not speak about Christians or Baha'i or different religions, because it's specifically focused on the non-religious. There are different penalties for men and women. Beheading is for men and imprisonment is for women. And it's related to the age, so it's considered you have to reach, you have to be an adult. But that varies how you can see maternity and being an adult in Afghanistan. So it could be that people are prosecuted while not considered an adult in Europe. And it's related to the hudud crimes, who are mentioned in the Quran. So it's inherent to Sharia law, which is focusing on the ones I mentioned before, imprisonment for women mainly. Confiscation of property is additional, and it's mainly the case that if it's not, there are not a lot of cases known about prosecutions, because it's mainly related to blasphemy laws. If you convert to a different religion, you get the chance to return or come back to the Islam, which is 3 days in total. That's the same for blasphemy. You can still have the chance in on paper at least. As I said before, there are not a lot of known cases. Many researchers give the reason for that it's hard to speak out, but it's also the charges that people faced, at least the people I interviewed that are known in research, is mainly people get prosecuted for different crimes, which are related to behavior of being non-religious, but it's not the claim for being an apostate. Then we continue to the blasphemy, the right to freedom of expression. If you consider to live in Afghanistan as a non-religious person, you should have the right to speak out about your opinion or what you have on your mind, which is not possible in this sense. Blasphemy considers anti-Islamic writing or speech, and it's a capital crime. It's the same thing as I said before. The 3 days you can return, or death penalty is put on blasphemy. Imprisonment is another punishment you can get. And in 2004 there was a new law on published materials, which there were several court cases for this. I wanted to highlight one example. It's a case of 2015 of a woman who was accused of burning the Quran. Well, in the end, the claim was false, but she was attacked publicly on the streets by many men who went for trial in the end, because there was a lot of international pressure. But the men were not prosecuted in general, or they were in court, but they got low sentences. What I wanted to do with the example is not showing that it's this is daily practice, but it's happening, and what happened to her is according to blasphemy that she was burning the Quran, which falls under the law of something which is not allowed, but she didn't do it. The other one is the freedom of assembly and association. You cannot have an organization which is registered as secular or non-religious. That's not allowed by the Afghan government, and it's the people in Afghanistan. In Pakistan there are some unions for atheists, but they're mainly working from abroad because it's not possible to work from the inside. And looking at the state is one factor, but I wanted to look at the society as well, and terrorist groups, which is kind of I think a logical sense that the Taliban, for example, if you preach against their interpretation, you're apostate as well. So non-religious people face the Afghan government, but also terrorists in certain groups and their own society. So if you look at society, it can be related to your parents, your brothers, the community you live in, the local mosque. But also, if you are a child of, let's say, a communist father or a non-religious parent, that you can still return. But if you choose not to, you still face the problems of your parents. And there are cases of people being prosecuted without even being prosecuted by the courts, but being prosecuted by their local communities, local authorities. If you are seen as that, it's the risk of violence, which I said by the community as well. In my research, it was quite clear there were some differences. I had people that went to court for blasphemy accusations, or they were prosecuted by their brothers or by their fathers. If they, the whole issue of being non-religious is that you can be non-religious without showing it. You can hide your non-religion. But the point is that you have the freedom to be yourself and to show it. So in that sense, you have to adjust to the culture and to the religion. So wearing Western clothes is part of the issue that's Many people said we studied abroad or we worked for the US Army, and that they couldn't be themselves. I wanted to highlight one of the risk analysis of apostates from Afghanistan. The EASO highlighted a few points, and it's mainly that the nature of violence they face is severe, that they needed protection in Europe. They also should take it into account that it is not an option to say, okay, you're non-religious, but you can hide it and you can return. That's the point. That's in many cases in Europe it's said like, you are non-religious, but we cannot, you cannot prove it, so you can just hide it and return. One of the quotes of somebody from my interview is his family situation, and he was still here. He's quite young. He arrived here when he was a teenager, and he is, in the sense, he said, it's a really lonely life in Afghanistan, what I faced, because I'm not part of my family anymore, not part of my community, and I'm non-religious, but there's no church, there's no mosque where I can go to, so they had no sense of belonging anymore. And then I would finish with my research, which is mainly focused on the arrival in Europe, and that it's focused on the experience people have arriving in a new country and asking for asylum on the base of being non-religious. So I did research and observations at the Dutch Humanist Association, and I collected interviews with participants there. And the main themes that arise from the data collection was that there's no single non-religious identity, because it's mainly said atheists from Afghanistan, agnos from Afghanistan, but people didn't mark themselves as one group. So that was one of the main highlights, that they cannot be identified as one term, and that the social context in the Netherlands was really significant in the way they felt themselves as a non-religious person, if it was positive or negative. I focused on the issue of protection, because in the Refugee Convention of 1951 it's mentioned that you get protection on the basis of religion, which is hard for this group because they have no religion anymore. So I focused on, okay, what changed after to cover this group. And it's an interpretation of the update of the guidelines, and there is mentioned that it's more broad, like that you cannot expect somebody to change back into a religious person if they are not religious anymore. But there is still no universal definition of being non-religious or what contains religion in these kind of conventions. So it's still hard to look at the cases. And that's why in 2014 in the UK was the first case of a person that's been granted asylum because of atheism, because it's hard to define on which ground they get protection. This was an example of a guy who in the end fled the country because he converted to Christianity. And the point is to show his case was internationally well known. He had a court case, he had involvement of the Afghan government. So he had enough proof to show, okay, I belong to a religious minority and I will get protection. But with many non-religious asylum seekers is, how do you prove you don't believe in anything anymore? So that's a harder case than Christianity, in the sense of finding evidence and telling your story. What I discovered is a theory of Ledru. He showed that there were three processes of getting non-religious, and it's a process of discovery. So first you discover new ideas, which can lead to atheism, and then self-discovery that it was part of you or of something else. And in the end, you discover a bigger group, so you can be part of a collective. And where I looked at is the non-religious identity as a collective identity. So I looked at the support group in Amsterdam. There's a group where non-religious refugees can come together. They all have a shared Islamic background. And they meet up to discuss the topics that they are concerned with. And what I mainly found is that when they lived in Afghanistan, they were not aware of the word atheist, agnostic, humanist, all the options we have available in English. And they use the negative terms that their environment gave them, so their parents, the locals, and they are sometimes still using this word to describe themselves because they have no different knowledge. And in the end, when the refugees, in this sense, because all of them that are quoted from Afghanistan got asylum, they had a big issue with the diaspora in Europe. So they came to the Netherlands in the expectation of safety and protection, but they arrived in asylum centers where the majority was religious, either Christian or Islamic, but the majority in asylum centers is Islamic. And they faced issues with being themselves even outside of Afghanistan, in the sense of doing their own thing during Ramadan, because Ramadan was widely celebrated in asylum centers. And also with the community outside of the asylum centers and the diaspora. It's mainly concerning Pakistan in my research, which was a real threat to people, but also people in my research who fled for the Taliban still face risks in the Netherlands by the Taliban. And what I also found is that because they get discriminated in Afghanistan while they flee and when they arrive in the Netherlands, is that they take that identity on them. So being non-religious is getting stronger because they get discriminated. So outside of Afghanistan, they feel free to be themselves. So their non-religious identity is getting one of the main identities they have. And the response to the stigma of being non-religious, which is in Afghanistan was a minority. In the Netherlands, non-religious persons are a majority. And they don't know how to act with it because they come from a collective society with a lot of social support. When they arrive in the Netherlands, that falls away. There's no communal place they can go to. So they have to start from scratch to shape their identities again and to feel where they belong to. Because this society was not really seen as a group that they belonged to. They felt safe and they had they faced no discrimination from non-religious Dutch people. But they also didn't feel really part of the group. And I wanted to end with the quote of one of my respondents in his fight that he, after getting asylum, for many of the respondents it was really important to get the residence permit because many of them who were still in procedure, they were not free enough for themselves to express that they were non-religious. And for many of them it was a relief to get their residence permit and to be able to start their lives. But the contradiction there was that once they got a permit, they got more, they found more peace in themselves, so they expressed less their non-religion. And for the ones who were still in procedure or illegal, they expressed their non-religion even more. So that were kind of the findings of the research and the presentation.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. Since we're running late, I will skip my question and we will just take one question from the audience. Yes, there.
Thanks for your excellent presentation, I must say that. During your research, have you ever found out that if there is like any extreme cases where somebody has been threatened in an European, inside Europe by either Taliban or, like the international terrorist groups? I mean, is there any known case where like the non-religious activists, like in the case of Bangladesh, have been threatened outside of their country?
Yeah, thank you for your question. There are cases like the meetings that are held in Amsterdam are held on the secret location because of the security situation of the people joining the meetings. Bangladesh, Pakistan, Iran are the main countries of the participants joining. And from Afghanistan, there were known cases of threats in Europe, in the Netherlands. So if there are, for example, lectures about this with participants participating, telling their stories, there are passport checks being held before the lecture starts, which indicates kind of the level of their security, and a lot of them spend the first time in safe houses or protected environments. So also from Afghanistan.
I know your question is very important and relevant, but Vera will be there on the panel discussion, so please save it for the panel discussion. Now we have 50 minutes break, lunch break, and vegan and 40 minutes. Oh yes, we're running late, so 40 minutes.
40 minutes.
Vegan and vegetarian lunch is served, so see you back at 13.